You're listening to the Turn Autism Around podcast, episode number 144. Today I have a very special guest, Rachel Smith, who I have known for half of her life, over half of her life, and she now is the program director for my company. But today we're talking all about her son Everett and his speech delays and Rachel's background as a special ed teacher. We talk on a variety of things about how COVID affected Everett's ability to speak, how she was pretty confident it wasn't autism, but these techniques that I'm teaching throughout the podcast and my book and my courses all helped to increase his language, how she had to suddenly repair toothbrushing, which happens. Suddenly kids freak out about certain things, and how she kind of got around that. And I think a big chunk of our conversation is around how to pick a daycare, a school environment for your child, whether the child is typical or whether your child or clients have autism, and how to pick an environment that's positive and that's going to be the best fit for him or her. So let's get to this special interview with Rachel Smith. Thanks so much for joining us today, Rachel. It's great to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here.
You are one of the few people that I know of in the whole world that has listened to every single podcast, front to back.
Every single
you get
one.
an award.
Yay! Yeah, every single one. Though it's exciting to be on now.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, since you have listened to everything, you know how we usually start. Describe your fall into the autism world.
So I've always wanted to be an educator. My parents will tell you that from the time I was young, that was what I was going to do. But really, I got started when I started volunteering around the age of 14 at Aaron's Acres, which is actually where we met through Lucas, and just really enjoyed being a part of that. And then I went on to actually come to your house and work with Luke and be a mommy's helper and hang out and, be an extra set of hands. And then we lost touch for a little bit, and I ended up
for like 10 years.
Yeah, a little more than a little bit, but ended up becoming a special education teacher, and then went on to get my master's in reading. And yeah, that's my fall.
Right. And then you when we lost touch for 10 years, and then you were in your mid-20s,
yeah.
And you started, I found you on care.com.
Yeah.
Which care.com is a national registry kind of organization that I found therapists and caregivers and babysitters and nannies. And that's really when I found Rachel again, and I remembered her name, and I usually remember people that are really good or really bad. So I talked to my friend and I was like, hey, do you know this person? And I said her first and last name, and she's like, oh yeah, she was a mommy's helper for us, after Aaron's Acres. So anyway, now Rachel, over the past couple of months only, has transitioned from really taking doing a lot of care with Lucas, and now transitioning to soon to be full-time with my company, but right now the program director, and doing a wonderful job. So
Thank you.
And also at the time of this recording, which is very early September, Rachel is 9 months pregnant. And so by the time this gets aired, we hopefully will have a very healthy baby joining her family. So today we really want to talk about her first son, Everett, who, I've known Rachel all throughout her pregnancy. And so he started to not have any signs of autism really, but was more on the speech delayed side. But he was also a COVID baby, a COVID toddler. So things started to happen revolving around COVID shortly around his first birthday.
Yeah,
So
we actually had to cancel his first birthday party, which I was so excited for. And then shutdown happened, and it was just kind of like, all right, we can't do this. And then my husband was home, working from home for about a year. And anytime I would go out, Everett stayed home, where before we were going to the grocery store together, going to story time, going to music. And all of that went away. And right around the time that he probably would have started speaking, and it just wasn't happening. And I was, around the time he was about 18 months old, got pretty concerned. He should have been, according to what everything says on, CDC milestones and stuff, he should have been trying to repeat us and saying certain things. And he had maybe 10 words by the time he was 2.
But they were like more pop out words.
Yeah.
Like she couldn't get him to talk. I didn't see him for that year. I saw him a little bit when he was a baby, but I didn't see him. But Rachel had taken my courses, and she was involved with videotaping her son Everett for our toddler course. And we have videos of toddlers with and without autism in the course. And we have a lot, I would say about half the people that introduce themselves in our toddler course community say they don't have a diagnosis of autism yet. They might be worried or waiting. You weren't necessarily worried about autism.
No, and because I knew what to look for because of this work and, having gone through the courses and read the book.
And listened to the podcast.
Like, I knew that he was super engaged. He wanted eye contact. He wanted to play with you. So I wasn't worried necessarily about autism, but I was concerned that the words weren't happening the way that they were naturally supposed to happen. And then you think, is this COVID? He hasn't been around people.
Absolutely.
Is this, he's only been around Dad and I, and maybe we're guilty of just giving him, I know he wants milk from the refrigerator, I'm just going to give it to him, versus making him, use his words. But I had done the MChat on him a few times. At 18 months, they had us do it at the doctor's office, and he scored a 0, which is no risk. And then as he continued to not talk, and we got closer to his second birthday, I would do it again. I did it a couple more times, like a total of 3. And every time he was scoring 0. But I have a nephew who's 4 days older and was, putting lots of words together. And here's Everett still, pop out words that I can't even get him to repeat to me. So it was definitely concerning.
Let's talk about the MChat a little bit. So I do talk about the MChat a little bit in my book, and it stands for the Modified Checklist for Autism in Toddlers, and it is valid for kids 16 months to 30 months. And I also did a video blog on the MChat, which we can link in the show notes. This is just a screening tool. I believe there's like 23 questions, like, does your child enjoy bouncing on your knee? Or does he point to show you things, like pointing to up in the sky to show you airplane? I also have a guide. Is it autism, ADHD, just a speech delay, or typical toddler tantrums? We can link that in the show notes as well. That's a free download guide. So it sounds like you were doing the right thing. You had, gone to your pediatrician. You had asked about, screening. The screening was negative. And these techniques work. But I remember, he was 2 and he only had, 10 what I call pop out words. And I was thinking, when did my typical son, Spencer, talk? And I remember being really nervous because I was breastfeeding Spencer, and I don't know, probably a coincidence, but when I weaned Lucas shortly after his first birthday, he started regressing, which I didn't notice, so it's like, is it, so I remember saying, like, I was going to just keep breastfeeding Spencer until he could talk. And basically that's what I did. But I didn't realize I thought that was 21 months. But we looked in Spencer's baby book and it was 27 months before he really started talking. And probably when I got echoic control, which echoic control means you say ball, the child says ball. And that's usually when we see the floodgates open for language, is when you get echoic control. And that doesn't mean like sit in a sterile room and go say ball, say I love you. It means, that's why my program is so much focused on multiple control, part mand, part tact, part echoic, part, keep it fun, keep it light. And you were doing those techniques.
Yeah. When I took him for his 2-year appointment, I said to the doctor, I know he's not speaking like he should be, but here's what I'm doing. And I told him about the course and, this is what I'm doing. And we have a shoebox and we're looking at pictures and, we're really engaged and we're singing songs and we're looking at books and Potato Head. And he can do all of the things and he'll put them, he's engaged, but he's just not talking to me yet. And I said, like, what do you recommend? And the doctor was like, well, I could refer you to speech, but they're not going to do anything that you're not already doing. He said an hour on Zoom for a kiddo who is and Everett is on the go all the time. For a kiddo who's on the go all the time, he's not going to sit for an hour and look at a computer screen to a person he doesn't know. He's like, honestly, Mom, I wish all my moms were doing this, because that's, going to get him talking. He said, when you're concerned and you want to start, you let me know. And I said, okay, so let's, I knew that I wasn't just waiting. So I said, let's give it 6 months and see what happens. And he's talking within that 6-month time frame. So,
right. So what do you think was the real key to get him talking? I know he started daycare, but he was talking a little bit more. But do you think it was daycare and exposure, or do you think it was just time and finally it clicked?
I think a mix of both. I think exposures definitely helped. We were definitely starting to see more language. We went into Ollie's and there was a Mickey book, and I remember him pointing across and he was like, Mickey. And I was like, and we're buying that, and then from there it was like anywhere we went, he would say bubbles. We would buy bubbles. Chalk was a big one. Like if I could get him to say it while we were there, we would buy it. Now he's a pro at putting things in the cart, But I don't know that we would be where we are had we not been working with him and then adding in that exposure.
Right. So a lot of it sounds like it was related to COVID and just the stop of going out. And he was just like home with you and your husband and very few other people that he got exposed to. And as you're talking, I remember hearing in a lecture many, many years ago, and I don't even think I've ever talked about this or it's in my course at all. But okay, so I have talked a fair amount about tax, which are labels, right? So a mand is a request and a tact is a label. And a lot of kids on the spectrum, they get very good at tacting, but it's weird because it's abnormal for me to be sitting in this room and say cup, pen, picture, wall, clock. It's weird because there's no reason for that. And if I'm saying clock or 12, 14, and even if I'm saying 12, 14, it's like, that's kind of a tact, but it's also a defective mand for your attention. Like we shouldn't be talking about the fact that it's 12, 14 unless that's really important for some reason, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so I think I learned that basically tax that are also mands for attention are more when a situation changes, like in a new environment, or if you're sitting in a classroom and all of a sudden a dog walks in the hallway, that's unusual, right? If you go to a store and you don't remember ever being at a store and there's Mickey, that's a change in your environment. So that was like an advanced, or it's a man for attention, but it was also a tact. Because even if you have a Mickey book at home, it's stationary, it's there, it's not exciting. And so as you were talking about this change in environment, which caused the language to go up, that makes a lot of sense. And so that's one of the reasons that if you are doing a shoebox program where it's just cut a slit into it, have pictures, you don't want to just use the same pictures. You want to get new pictures. Any pop-out words where you get pictures. You maybe try magnets or 3D objects in a box. I remember one of the conferences I was at was like, you know how they used to have, I mean, I'm dating myself now, where you pull out this picture frame and it basically flips the pictures.
Okay.
So that it's like a change, so you can get more spontaneous tact versus what is it? You know, so because you really want, especially with little kids and older kids, but with first words, you want it to be a combination of that's exciting, that's Mickey, oh, you know, that's a book, and to get your attention at the same time. So that makes whole lot of sense.
Yeah, because I remember even when I would ask you, like, all right, well, what else can I try? You know, I'm trying. Just like putting things in the bag and like making it appear was exciting. And, you know, not just doing the same thing over and over to build that language.
And I do have a podcast and I believe a video blog on echoic controlling kind of those techniques of making it more exciting. Like if you can't get your child to speak or your clients, get a brown paper bag, and we can link that in the show notes. So anything I say we're going to link in the show notes will be there. It will be at marybarbera.com/144. That'll be your episode.
My episode.
as the champion listening to all the podcasts. Okay, so you also started, we're going to talk about daycare and how you chose a daycare and that sort of thing. You also told me that toothbrushing at some point kind of was great and then it wasn't. Was that before or after you started daycare? Was that recent?
After? Yeah, that was recent.
Okay.
We can start there. He would, like, anytime we'd walk past the bathroom for a while, he wanted to brush his teeth and was excited. And so we were like, all right, great. We have a good toothbrusher. And then one day it was just like a fight. You know, we went to brush his teeth before bed and my husband and I were like, what is going on? He was like freaking out and crying. And I was like, this isn't how we do things. You know, like we don't do the crying. We don't do the screaming. So, I was like, all right, I gotta figure this out. So I was like, okay, right now we're really into Paw Patrol. So we got videos and he could watch a video while we were brushing his teeth. And then I bought a new toothbrush that had Chase on it. And
is that a Paw Patrol?
Yeah, that's his
character?
favorite. Yeah, okay. That's his favorite one. And he is totally back into it. We don't even need to watch videos anymore. Okay. You know, we were able to wean those away and just brush our teeth, and he's excited. He goes in, grabs the toothbrush, and you know, it's a lot more enjoyable.
So why do you think he started to fuss about toothbrushing?
I honestly I don't know. I wish I did, because then I think I would have figured it out sooner, because it took me a couple of days to be like, all right, this is miserable, of him, you know, freaking out. I don't know if it was just a change in routine. I think he knows that things are changing. Mommy's belly is getting bigger. Life is, you know, looking a little different. So I just, you know, I think probably a variety of things. But I think that happens with kids. Like 1 minute
they go through a phase or something, and one of the things that can happen, and I don't know if this was the case or not, but in chapter 13 of my new book is all about desensitization and repairing of things. And Michelle C., who's in podcast 78, we can link that in the show notes. She all of a sudden was in our group and she said her daughter, Elena, was freaking out with a bath all of a sudden. And so I went in and I said, when there's a sudden change in something like a bath or toothbrushing, there might have been a recent episode where a child was kind of forced to do something like a medical exam where they were held down, or like he had already started daycare, you know, maybe do they brush their teeth at school?
Now that you say that, I think my husband and I had like an actual date night, which never happens. And I think it was a change in routine with like my sister brushing his teeth, and maybe she did it differently. Yeah. And then he was like, nope, I'm done. So
right.
That's actually,
So that's great.
Yeah.
So when you have a freak out, okay, you have to think about like what happened. Did somebody hold him down? And in Elena's case, yes, she had just had an MRI, so she was held down. And you're thinking, well, how in the world could last week's MRI and hold down affect bathtub? But it definitely can. And that's why my approach is very much don't force a child, no crying. We want a child running to the toothbrush, not freaking out. So if they're not running, it's your job to figure it out. Then we repair by buying a better toothbrush, maybe an electronic toothbrush, maybe not doing any toothpaste, maybe trying a different toothpaste. Kind of just doing like, okay, watch mommy. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, your turn. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pairing it up with a video. I mean, those are all great techniques. And in my book, I basically have the outline of what Michelle did for Elena. And by a week later, she was asking for more bath and that sort of thing. It sounds like a similar thing happened for Everett.
I actually remembered that part of chapter 13 and being like, okay, we need to figure this out, because no one's happy when your toddler is freaking out to do something that you have to do. Like we have to brush our teeth. We can't not brush our teeth, but it also doesn't have to be miserable. So, I started out on the couch. We were brushing out on the couch while he was distracted by the TV. And then now we're back in the bathroom. We don't need a distraction. He just likes his toothbrush. So it definitely was a little bit of a process, but it's much more enjoyable for everyone now. So
cool. And we can put the Desensitization podcast in the show notes as well.
Good one.
Okay. So let's talk about choosing a daycare.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about dropping him off at daycare and how that went. But choosing a daycare is very similar, the same, to choosing a preschool, choosing a regular school, choosing an autism school, choosing a therapy company. I did do a video blog on the topic with some, I don't remember the exact points. We can link that in the show notes as well, because that is a really good one. So just in general, when you started thinking about daycare and you decided that you were going to put him in part-time, what kind of things were you looking for?
So I wanted somewhere that we could go in and look. And with COVID, that was kind of tricky. A lot of places were doing like virtual tours, or, you met with someone who was sitting in an office on Zoom and you couldn't see the room and you couldn't see the kids and the interaction. And that was really important to me to see, having been a teacher, like what the environment in the classroom looked like. So that was one of our number ones, was that we needed to be able to physically see it and take him with and kind of see what he was, if he was interested. So another big one for us was like, what did their discipline policy look like? As far as like, if he does something, are we being stuck in timeout? What does that look like? Because if timeout's not done well, then it's pointless. And we don't really use it for our 2-year-old right now, because it's a hard concept to understand. So it was important to kind of figure that out. And where we did pick uses a lot of like redirection. And when we were in the building, the teachers were positive, the kids were happy. It was important to me that we didn't walk into a place where there was a bunch of, screaming and crying kids. They were excited to be there. So that was really important. Knowing what their policy was if he wasn't interested in what they were serving for lunch that day. Like, are you going to force him to sit at a table until he eats? Just things like that, because I didn't want to unpair all the things that we do at home. Like he's a pretty good eater. He's, a pretty easygoing kid. And I wanted to make sure that wherever we were sending him was going to be good for him long term. Because the reason we really started was for him to get some interaction with other people besides Dad and I. And I wanted it to be worthwhile for everybody, for him to be there. So that was important.
Yeah. And I think the number one thing, and I've said this in lectures for many, many years, if I'm picking daycare A or daycare B, and I go in, I didn't even think about like not even being able to go in, which that is definitely something else to think about. But daycare A is like, stop that. If you don't if you don't cooperate, I'm putting the toy away. You need to sit crisscross applesauce. How many times do I have to tell you? Get away from your friends. You need to have more space. Like, these are the kind of negative. And then you go into classroom B and it's, oh, I like the way you're sharing. Oh, hands down, everybody's so awesome. Happy Monday. And positives, 8 positives to every negative. We've talked a lot about that.
And that was the feeling I got in the classroom that we were in, that he was going to be in. The kids, there was 5 little boys, and they were all gathered around the book and so excited. And the teacher was like, yeah, like, come look at it. Like, let's talk about it. And it wasn't like, oh, you need to be sitting down. Like, it's like they're 2, So I was really excited to be able to see that and witness that before he was there.
Yeah. And now, in this day and age, there's, apps, and I'm super impressed by how they keep Rachel and her husband informed of any issues. And
we have there's an app, and they, let us know what he ate and diaper changes and, how he napped. They send pictures, which is really nice. Because it's the first time we've really been away from each other, him and I. And so it's nice to get pictures throughout the day and know what kind of activities he's doing so that I can talk to him about it. Especially when he first started, he wasn't really talking. So it's not like I could be like, tell me about your day, because he couldn't. So it's nice to be able to ask him questions and know what he's doing throughout the day.
Yeah. So dropping kids off at daycare or preschool for the first time, or the first time in a while, if you've been homeschooling since COVID, and whether or not you have a little toddler like Rachel, who's maybe a little speech delayed, or a typical child, or a child with severe autism, the drop-offs can be not good. In fact, I just saw, we're recording this in early September, and I just saw, one of my Facebook friends dropped off her daughter, and she's screaming, and she has autism, and it's like, that is heartbreaking. And it doesn't mean that it's a horrible place, but at the same time, and there's not a whole lot of choices for some people in some areas, with some kids with some disabilities. There's just not like, here's option A and here's option B, and they're both great, but this one's a little better. Some of these places, I remember the first special ed setting I looked at when Lucas was just diagnosed. Nothing horrendous was happening, but it was like kids were taking off their shoes, and I was just like, oh my God, Lucas is going to do that. And it looked like the kids were really impaired, and he was going to typical preschool for a year before that. And I remember just going out to my car and sobbing. I just couldn't envision putting him there. But let's talk about just dropping him off and how that went and how you were feeling.
So again, I feel really lucky in the place that we ended up. I have a lot of friends who are dropping kids off, and they're not even allowed in the buildings. With COVID, especially, like, it's you pull up and somebody's taking your kid out of their car seat and in the building, and it's, or you can walk them up to the door and then someone's grabbing them and taking them in. And so I've felt really lucky that we've been able to walk him into the building and say our goodbyes. It was really important to keep it short. When dropping him off, it was very much like reassuring him that I loved him, and hugs and kisses, and I'll be back, and saving my own tears until I got to the car. I really liked that his teacher was very much like involved in the handoff. And even though the first couple times there were some tears on his part, but she was, hugging him and consoling him, and he wasn't just like left to stand and cry. Which was really important to me, because I've seen that too, where kids are just left at the door and mom's gone and now I'm sobbing and nobody's making me feel better.
Yeah.
And he, then they would let me know through the app, like, okay, it's been 5 minutes and he's playing and fine. So,
That's gotta make you feel
which
a lot
made me
better.
feel so much better. A lot of it then, as, we got to dropping him off more often, it became more, I think he made me feel bad. Like, he knew that I felt bad when I was leaving him, but as soon as I would leave, like, I would hear him stop crying as soon as the door was shut, and I was like, okay, you're fine. Now, a few months in, he's walking himself into the building, running into the classroom, like, they have little, like, ID cards, handing his ID card to the teacher and smiling, and is, like, waving and bye-bye, mama. So that feels really good to know that he's happy where he is.
Yeah. And I would say anybody that's dropping a child off somewhere and there's crying on the child's part, and there's definitely, probably crying on the parent part too. But, I prefer like a no cry ever, but
Right.
as long as the child's safe, there is communication, and the crying is going down. So like the first day crying might be 10 minutes. The second day crying might be 8 minutes, 5 minutes, 4 minutes, and then gone. And if the child's only going, say, Tuesdays and Thursdays, there might be crying for a couple weeks on a Tuesday because that's going to be less recent and stuff like that. Like, if the child is crying, just making sure that they're safe and that the crying goes away. Like, if the crying, and as a parent, not to hover or go back in 5 or 10 or 15 minutes later to console the child, because if you do that, even if you're leaving your house and your child's home with, say, dad, and you're the mom, and you're leaving the house and you hear crying, and if you keep going back, that's way high intermittent reinforcement, and that crying will continue. I remember when I used to go visit Lucas at his autism ABA school, which was like an hour away. Like, if I'd be at a meeting there and I'd pop in to see him in the classroom, now I'm going home, but he's not. There could be some like separation or crying around that. So I would preventatively bring a snack for him. And so then I'd go in, I'd see him, and I'd say, Mommy's going home. You're going to take the bus. Here's a little snack while Mommy leaves. I'll see you later. And so that way I was basically pairing me leaving with something he really liked. So like that might be another idea. Like if Everett really liked a stuffed animal or something, maybe he could take the stuffed animal with him. And I think the best thing is pick a positive environment if at all possible. Work with, and if you're in a negative environment, then it's your job as the parent and as the advocate to turn that around. And that's going to be a lot of work. And then just to have open communication to try to get it better and better.
And I remember, like, I asked you, what should I be looking for? Those kind of things. And the other thing I really like about where he is, which you talk about too, is they have an open door policy. So I am allowed to go into his classroom if I wanted to. It would probably be hard on him for me to leave, but I can see what they're doing. There's no like, nope, sorry, he's here for the day. You can't see him, and I think that's important. Like, as we talk about different therapy programs and stuff too, like, a lot of times they're like, okay, I'm going to take your kid to this closed door, and then you might hear them, but you can't. It's nice to know that I have access to him if I need to.
And also a note, as you're saying that, is if you're having home therapy, it's not okay for you to be all positive and to follow my techniques, maybe take my online course. This actually happened. I could give you a few examples where this mom, was following my course. She finally got into the front of the line for ABA services. ABA starts and they're like, okay, we're taking him in his bedroom. We're closing the door with the table. And there was crying for an hour and a half. And talk about unpairing the situation. And then, the mom comes on the online community and is like, is this okay? And then, no, it's not okay.
Right.
I mean, you can't afford to unpair everything. Plus, you are your child's voice. And so you need to turn that around, and you need to be a part of that transfer of information and supporting your child through that. Another example of another online participant, she was doing my course, she's driving 70 miles each way for an hour speech therapy session, and they wouldn't let her in the room. Our policy is that you stay out here in the lobby. Why don't you go shopping? As they're dragging Johnny back and he's screaming. What is the point? Like, no therapy is better than bad therapy. And now that you have the tools, you have the book, the podcast, the courses, you know how to do good therapy, or you can learn how to do good therapy in relatively short time. But it's tough, and I think COVID definitely complicated the situation for Everett, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It was obviously not something we were, expecting or knew how to handle. Anybody, the worldwide pandemic, but having these tools, in my toolkit definitely helped. Even like with my husband, like not an educator, not someone who, is in the field and
not somebody who's ingested all this information about child development either.
Exactly. But he is, watching me, or he'll be like, hey, what do we do here? Like even like the shush and give that you talk about so often, like we use that and we've gotten, tantrums decreased tremendously because we don't just give in. And it's just so helpful for parenting in general.
Yeah. And you're posting more about, the speech delay that happened and how these same techniques work. And you're getting a lot of high school friends and college friends are reaching out to you, like my child, because 1 in every 6 kids has some kind of developmental disorder actually diagnosed. Like Everett doesn't have a diagnosis. His speech delay is done, for at least for now.
Right.
But your eyes are wide open. I mean, anything can happen to any child at any moment. But I think you realize, between your special education knowledge and your autism knowledge, your child development knowledge, and just knowing how to be positive and an advocate for your child, it sounds like you're well equipped for Everett and for the new baby who's coming soon.
Yeah, soon, hopefully.
Okay, so to wrap it up, part of my podcast goals here is not to just help the kids, but also for parents and professionals out there to be less stressed and lead happier lives. So what do you do for self-care or stress management?
So this is probably the hardest question you've asked me as a mom to a toddler and, pregnant with number 2. I think the most important thing I've learned to do since becoming a mom is asking for help when I need it. Letting my husband know, like, hey, I need to tag you in here, or we need a night out, or I need a few hours to myself. Definitely getting better about advocating for myself as well and what I need.
Yeah. Well, that sounds good. All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm glad you got the opportunity to come on. I'm sure we're going to have you on again. Good luck with baby number 2.
Thank you.
We'll be hearing more about Rachel. I'll keep my podcast listeners up to date with baby number 2. And thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.